Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are strapping in for a journey. We're heading to the high moorlands of Iceland.
And we are exploring one of the great, and I mean, you could really argue one of the bleakest explorations of self-reliance ever written.
Halldór Laxness's Nobel Prize-winning epic, Independent People.
It's so much more than just a novel. It's basically a philosophical treatise, but it's wrapped in the incredibly harsh reality of Icelandic crofter life in the early 20th century.
And the sources you've gathered for us today, these core excerpts, they really paint a full picture of the central conflict.
Exactly. Our mission here, it isn't just to summarize a story. It's to really pull out the core insights, and they're often brutal insights, into what independence actually means.
When it's not some abstract political idea.
Right. When its success is measured in, say, kilograms of hay, or the integrity of a turf wall, or just the sheer stubborn capacity for one person to endure alone.
That's it, exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
if you came here looking for a cozy pastoral tale about triumphing over nature, well, you should probably prepare yourself.
Yeah, this isn't that.
The sources introduce us immediately to our protagonist, Björtur of Summer Houses. And this is a man whose whole identity is fused with this principle of absolute self-sovereignty.
His whole life is this decades-long struggle, and it's built on these high, desolate moors, a place that's governed by ancient superstitions, crushing economic systems, and the just brutal, inescapable cycle of nature all at the same time.
Björtur is a force of nature himself, isn't he? He embodies this idea that to be truly free, you have to own nothing.
To any man,
Yeah.
or any spirit for that matter. But the very world he lives in, a world of sheep and merchants and weather you can never predict, it demands interdependence. It forces it.
So that's the core conflict.
It's the inescapable tension between his immense pride and his, frankly, very fragile reality. That's the engine for this whole deep dive. We're going to see how his quest for independence is, well, it's both noble and, in the end, absolutely devastating.
So let's start at the very beginning. The literal foundation of his ambition, the land itself.
Okay, so Björtur has just earned his own property after 18 long years of servitude to the bailiff at a place called Ralphsmiri.
And he doesn't see this as just, buying a piece of land. For him, it's something much bigger.
Oh, it's epic. He sees himself as participating in an ancient saga. He claims his identity as an Icelandic pioneer in the 30th generation.
That self-definition is everything, isn't it? He's not just a farmer, not just a peasant.
No, he's consciously placing himself in this direct lineage of the Landnámsmenn, the original Viking settlers, who claimed Iceland 1,000 years before.
So his first act on the land is loaded with all that history.
It is. It's deeply symbolic, almost ritualistic, and it defines his whole philosophical stance right from the get-go.
Can you tell us a bit more about that symbolic act? Because it's so powerful and so primal.
It really is. So we're told he stands on the highest point of his knoll, right? He plants his feet firmly, standing like a Viking pioneer who has found his high seat posts. And then he establishes his boundaries in the most elemental way you can imagine. He makes water in the 4 cardinal directions:
He urinates on his land.
north, east, south, towards the mountain, the marsh, the snow-coated Blue Mountains. It's an act of total ownership, a proclamation of his dominion over the landscape, performed by his own body.
And at the same time, it's a complete and total rejection of the world he just left behind. He refuses to accept the history of the place.
Exactly. He renames the farm. It's now Summer Houses, which he links to his own baptismal name, Bjartur, which he believes ought to mean right.
He's scrubbing the slate clean.
Completely. He says he wants no name that are bound up with specters of the past on my farm. And this includes what he calls the relics of old popery.
That phrase, relics of old popery, that's a really loaded term.
It is. I mean, it links all the way back to the Protestant Reformation in Iceland centuries earlier, when Catholicism was officially abolished. For a man in the early 20th century to still be using that term,
What does that tell you?
it suggests he views the entire collective history, all the folklore, all the communal religious practices, as a form of weakness, a dependence. His independence isn't just economic. It's an intellectual cleansing of history. He's insisting on a modern, self-made reality.
And that intellectual self-sovereignty is, well, it's the key to his entire character. His core beliefs guide every single thing he does.
And you see it so starkly in how he enjoys power. The source describes him observing the submissiveness of his dog, Tidla.
Right. And he sees that obedience as human nature's loftiest dream.
The rapture of command. It's a sad little irony, isn't it? The loftiest dream he can achieve is command over a single subservient animal.
He's conquered this tiny patch of land, and his dog is the only being that confirms his absolute power.
Which immediately tells you how limited and fragile his self-sovereignty actually is when it comes up against the rest of the world.
And his self-reliance goes even deeper into his skepticism, which is almost, I'd say, aggressively pronounced.
He strips away any dependence on metaphysical comfort or, communal wisdom. He has that famous line.
I have my 5 senses and don't see what need there is for more.
It's pure, rugged empiricism.
Yeah.
He refuses to acknowledge anything he can't see or touch or measure himself. And that puts him immediately at odds with the very landscape he lives in, which is just saturated with ancient folklore and spirits.
You see that so clearly in that small moment early on with his first wife, Rosa. She wants to drop a stone for Gunvor's ghost.
Which is a traditional local practice, to appease the spirits, get some good luck for the journey.
And Bjartur's refusal is just absolute. He dismisses it as more popery.
He insists we pay our dues to the living. He's trying to establish a new covenant, one based purely on observation and practicality. But his practicality, it often has this grim, almost brutal kind of poetry to it.
That's a great way to put it. His philosophy isn't just denial, it's observation that leads to this essential stripped-down wisdom.
Exactly. Like when we read about him chewing the new rooty swamp grass in the spring, he tastes it and he says, this stuff has saved many a life after a long winter in little hay.
And then he connects it all together.
It is this young swamp grass that gives the sheep new life in the spring, you see, and the sheep gives man new life in the autumn. He just boils the entire cycle of existence down to that one unforgiving exchange between man, grass, and sheep.
It really is the poetry of necessity. And so this pioneer, with this ruthless philosophy, he goes and beats the physical reality of his freedom.
And the description of summer houses, the croft itself, it just immediately destroys any romantic idea you might have had about the simple, self-reliant life.
It's an astonishing monument to deprivation.
It's minuscule.
Yeah.
It's barely functional. The sources describe the door as being so small and the threshold so high that you literally have to stoop down low just to get inside.
And that's not some aesthetic choice for humility.
No, that's a defense against the elements. It's pure necessity.
And then you get inside, and the conditions are even worse. The turf walls on the outside are so thick, they admit almost no light.
And the living quarters are just these 2 fixed bedsteads and a table nailed to the windowsill. The only source of light is a tiny window, not much bigger than the palm of a hand.
Just think about that for a second. Your home is perpetually dark, perpetually smelling of damp earth, and it forces you to bow just to enter your own kingdom.
Bjartur's independence is literally purchased with darkness and physical discomfort. This physical isolation is a mirror of the intellectual isolation he prizes so much.
It's a structure built to keep the world out.
But in doing so, it keeps the light and any real comfort out too. It's a fortress, but it's also a prison of his own making.
Okay, so if that's the philosophical and physical foundation, what's the economic one? And that takes us straight into the unremitting struggle, the sheep.
Yeah, the deep dive makes it immediately clear that the independence Bjartur craves so much is completely 100% conditional on the health of his flock.
The sources call the crofter's life a grim, unremitting battle for existence.
And the sheep are the absolute focal point of all their anxiety, all their hope, and all their despair.
They're the central pillar of his life, but they're also his central vulnerability. That's the huge paradox here, isn't it?
It is. A man seeking absolute sovereignty is utterly at the mercy of the fragile biology of his own livestock.
And Bjartur, being Bjartur, he aims high. He wants the best. He wants to rear the Reverend Gudmundur's breed.
Which are known for being well-fleshed, firm, and this is key, not a rambling breed. These are sheep that are efficient, they're smart about finding their own food, so they require less labor.
It's his own philosophy in animal form, efficient self-reliance.
Precisely. But no matter how good the breed is, nature always finds a way.
And you see that in the conversations of the local community. They're just dominated by pestilence, by these constant shifting threats.
For a long time, the big one was the tapeworm. It was considered a national curse.
And what's so fascinating is how they dealt with it. It shows this blend of practical knowledge and, hard-won experience.
We read that the progress they made against it was only through increasing progress in canine hygiene.
Meaning they figured out their own sheepdogs were spreading it.
Exactly. The dogs were the primary vector. They had to learn to purge the dogs regularly to save the sheep. The national curse was, in part, a failure of sanitation among their most essential helpers.
But just as they start to get a handle on that, a new threat pops up.
Almost immediately. The lungworm. And it rapidly ousted the former from pride of place as a subject of conversation.
So the focus shifts from one invisible enemy to another. Now they're worried about coughing, sluggishness, and this foul-smelling diarrhea.
This constant shifting battle against invisible enemies is just a perfect metaphor for their whole existence. They don't have the luxury of a stable environment. They're constantly having to research and adapt and debate new threats on the fly.
And their veterinary philosophy is, well, it's a wonderful mix of confidence and utter confusion.
Yes, the source mentions that local wisdom, that there's nothing to fear as long as you manage to keep them clear of diarrhea in the wintertime.
Even if there are maggots coming out of their nostrils, apparently. A clean belly is the only thing that matters.
It's an oversimplification born of pure desperation. You focus on the one observable symptom you think you can treat, and you just ignore the complex, unseen parasite destroying the animal from the inside.
And that desperation, it informs their whole worldview, even their logic about resources. There's that great quote about fodder.
Chaw is chaw and fodder, water.
It sounds like nonsense at first, but what is he actually saying?
He's saying that at a certain point, basic sustenance is just basic sustenance. The hierarchy of survival is absolute. It's a dismissal of any complex analysis about, specific nutritional needs.
So in their world, hay is hay. You get what you can get.
And you prioritize sheer volume over quality, because volume is what gets the animal through the winter. It's about the brutal physical needs of survival above all else.
And that need for fodder, it leads to the most agonizing choices they have to face.
The seasonal threat of starvation. The sources describe these extreme situations, especially during spring blizzards, when the stored hay runs critically low.
And Jartur himself faces this choice, a truly severe choice. He has a tiny amount of home field hay left, and it has to go to either the newly acquired cow,
A potential source of dairy, of long-term stability.
or to the pregnant ewes.
The immediate foundation of his flock, his wool production, is everything. And the calculus is just brutal. Only the one or the other could survive.
It's not just a choice between two animals. It's a conflict between future stability, the cow, and immediate existence, the ewes.
And Jartur, the man of pure reason, is forced into this zero-sum game by his environment. If he chooses the cow, the sheep die. His whole enterprise collapses. If he chooses the sheep, he sacrifices the chance for a better diet, for dairy.
The land just demands the sacrifice of one hope to preserve another. It's relentless.
And the starvation is so pervasive that Finna, who is Bertur's second wife, she introduces this survival ritual for the children. It's this incredible intersection of mythology and scarcity.
She's trying to help them process the overwhelming reality of their poverty.
This is the beautiful, heartbreaking story of Jesus and the whisk. Finna whittles this piece of wood, fringes it with yarn, and she explains that Jesus came to a poor woman and taught her how to whip up the milk to make it go further.
She takes the last few drops of milk they have, adds rennet, and just whips it furiously.
Until the volume is expanded and it seems to fill the pan to the brim.
The children, of course, are just captivated. They're impressed by the magic of Jesus.
But the source makes it really clear what they're actually witnessing. It's an act of sheer desperation. It's survival magic. It's a way to stretch a few drops of nourishment into a thin, watery meal just by whipping air into it.
It's the closest they can get to making something from nothing. And they use a story, a myth, to feed a very real physical need.
And it connects right back to what we were saying earlier. They're constantly juggling the physical battle for existence with the need for some kind of spiritual or emotional sustenance.
So if the reality is perpetual scarcity,
then the story provides the illusion of divine intervention, and that allows them to carry on the unremitting battle just a little bit longer. It's a defense mechanism against the hard truth that chaw is chaw.
it's the perfect counterpoint to Bjartur's absolute empiricism. While he's rejecting all the purpery, his family is finding solace in these necessary illusions.
Which brings us perfectly to the next section, to exploring the really unique cultural landscape that exists in this seemingly desolate place.
What's so remarkable about this crofter community is the sheer intellectual contradiction it presents. I mean, despite the constant grim physical struggle we've just been talking about.
The sources are very clear on this.
Mm-hmm.
These men are by no means spiritual paupers. Their minds are active, they're engaged, they're highly cultured, even while their bodies are just constantly laboring.
And their intellectual culture is sustained entirely through oral tradition, right? Which is just a testament to that deep Icelandic literary heritage.
Absolutely. We hear about this tradition of verse. Men knew verse, And they were capable of improvising these complex quatrains, sometimes right on the spot, about poverty or danger or their neighbors or nature.
And this isn't just simple rhyming.
No, no. Icelandic verse follows these incredibly demanding rules. It involves specific meter, alliteration, internal rhymes, and rhymes, often handed down for centuries right from the sagas.
So this level of literary skill, often displayed when they were fortified by a bit of brandy.
It highlights that they were guardians of a deep, high culture, even while they were shoveling sheep manure. They'd quote from sagas, from rhymes, preserving history through performance.
But even within that shared tradition, there's intense conflict. The poetic argument, it's basically an academic debate happening right there on the moorland.
It is. The argument was between those who swore by the classical form and the heroic spirit of the old ballads, the epic traditional stuff celebrating conquering kings and ancient honor,
And the others?
and those who believed in the human and the divine, preferring the modern love poets. It's a perfect microcosm of the conflict between the old world Piarder's uncompromising self-reliance and the new world, with its softening, humanizing influence of romance and community.
It's amazing that a debate about aesthetics could be so central to their lives. But alongside this high culture, the spiritual world of the land, the ancient terror, it just persists, regardless of Björtur's rational rejection.
Oh, it haunts the land itself. The most pervasive terror is Gunvor's curse. The legend is that she murdered travelers and abandoned her newborns to the elements because of crippling poverty.
She couldn't feed them.
Right, and the source notes that her wails are still heard in the spring thaw, and others, who are weighted with stones and sunk in the lake, are heard weeping in the midwinter moonlight, often right before a big storm.
That's a truly haunting image. The history of poverty is literally woven into the sounds of the environment, and this deep history is then compounded by a more immediate, personal malevolence that seems focused on summer houses itself. The devil or ghost who, legend says, laid waste to that very croft 7 times in history.
And this belief comes roaring back when Bjartur, the man who rejects all superstition, starts losing his sheep to these mysterious, brutal deaths that just defy his practical logic.
Let's talk about the deaths because they're so vividly described. They are not natural.
Not at all. There's one you found dead, rammed in a ladder with its spine crumpled and a horn twisted around the edge.
And then the finest lamb is found later, hanged from the roof with a halter.
These deaths are psychologically unbearable for Bjartur. He can handle disease. He can handle starvation. Those are things he can fight with his 5 senses. But these deaths, they suggest a malicious intelligence, an invisible enemy.
So because he can't accept that his own decisions or failures led to this, he has to find something else to blame.
He externalizes it. He blames the ancient enemy of the fold, Kullumkili.
Which leads to the ultimate contradiction in his character, the furious confrontation. The man who rejects popery channels all his rage into this pagan challenge to the secret powers of existence.
He stands out on the slope in front of the croft and demands that Kullumkili and his trollop Guthfor show some sign of manhood and fight him openly.
He refuses to accept a passive failure. He demands a physical enemy he can meet head-on.
It's his own twisted way of maintaining his empiricism. If you're going to destroy my life, at least be man enough to show yourself so I can apply my 5 senses to defeating you. It's an incredible moment of defiant desperation.
And the fact that this community harbors so many of these contradictions is shown again in characters like Olafur of Istadale.
Oh, Olafur's a fascinating study in the chaos of newly available information. He's a member of the Modernizing Patriots Association, so you'd think he'd be progressive.
Open to scientific doctrine.
And he is. But he believes completely contradictory things with equal fervor. For instance, based on something he read in an old book, he believes the sun occasionally slows down, causing time to go backwards, at least a little bit.
Okay.
But then he pairs that with something completely modern and absurd, that dead souls enter into the furniture in the houses of highly placed men in Reykjavik.
Why do those two beliefs coexist so easily in one mind?
I think it speaks to the nature of intellectual life in these isolated communities. When the world suddenly opens up through print, the distinction between an outdated scientific almanac, a serious philosophical text, and a ridiculous rumor in a city newspaper gets blurred.
The printed word itself has authority.
Exactly. If it's written down, it carries weight. Whether it's discussing the rotation of the earth or ghosts in a politician's armchair, it's information overload without the critical filtering we take for granted.
And you see a similar kind of contradiction in the figures of authority, like the local minister.
The minister is a total enigma. He's described as a cynical realist who never wearied of denouncing sheep.
He genuinely believed they seduced men's hearts away from God and true faith.
He thought their endless focus on livestock was an abandonment of the spiritual life. And yet,
This is the same man who brought that highly valuable, well-fleshed Reverend Gudmundur's breed to the district. He provided this immense practical benefit to the very people whose obsession he despised.
he's a religious devotee out of spite. He performs his duties and gives his sermons largely out of contempt for the soullessness of men who thought of nothing but dogs and sheep. He's a scientific success who morally scorns the object of his own success.
His life is a performative paradox.
It really is. The whole intellectual life of the moorland is complex, rich, and just utterly contradictory. But no matter how deep their poetry or wild their superstitions, they can't escape the hard reality of money and power.
Right. And when we shift from those metaphysical debates to the politics of money, the sheer gulf between the crofter's reality and the perspective of the wealthy elite, it just becomes a huge theme.
And no one embodies that gulf more perfectly than the bailiff's wife. Her views on rural life are, they're astonishingly romanticized and ultimately profoundly condescending.
She has convinced herself that rural culture is the nation's greatest educational institution.
And that poor people are happy practically without exception. Her conviction, which she gets partly from reading foreign literature, allows her to believe that life on the moor is this tranquil, blissful existence.
Her views on wealth are especially jarring. She claims that rich people own nothing but anxiety.
Right, they only have much business, while poor people are happy because their only requirement for bliss is to rise an hour earlier in the morning and work an hour later at night.
That is a staggering simplification of destitution. She's viewing this grueling, endless labor, the very thing that killed Bjartur's first wife, as a quaint lifestyle choice that just guarantees happiness.
The physical reality of the croft, the darkness, the cold, the debt, it's completely erased by her literary fantasy. She needs to believe the poor are happy so she doesn't have to confront the implications of her own comfort.
And she delivers this toxic optimism as marital advice to the young bride, Rosa. She frames the wife's part as the loftiest function, investing the home with tranquility and bliss.
So that everyone feels equal to the greatest of obstacles, and free and pure and courageous. She's demanding that the wife become this constant source of emotional labor in an environment that actively crushes the spirit.
It's an impossible ideal.
Thrust upon a woman who's about to enter a mud and turf bunker where she will very quickly learn that emotional tranquility means nothing against disease and starvation. That juxtaposition is one of the darkest parts of the book.
So while the elite are building these fantasies, the economic landscape is rapidly changing with the arrival of the cooperative movement. And this is pitched as nothing less than an economic revolution.
It's a deliberate restructuring of the entire Icelandic economy. Ingólfur Arnarsson, the cooperative secretary, he even describes himself as a colonist.
Which indicates he sees this as an act of reclaiming the country from internal exploitation.
The enemy is very clear. The gang of conspirators, the traditional merchants who had held the crofters captive through a perpetual system of debt.
We should probably explain that system a bit. For generations, the crofters operated on credit with the local merchants.
Right. They'd sell their wool and livestock in the autumn to pay down the debt they'd racked up buying flour and supplies in the spring.
And the system was designed so they could never actually get ahead. The debt just kept piling up, from the parish to the county to the country, enriching the merchants and basically binding the farmers to the land.
And the cooperative movement promised to break that cycle. It promised fair returns for their produce and reasonable standard prices for goods. The goal was to eradicate the merchant class and save the peasantry through collective action.
The opportunity for this movement to really take off arrives with World War I, far away.
The war increases international demand for Icelandic products, which ushers in a period of relative prosperity and accelerates the widespread embrace of the co-op. Progress, for the first time, seems inevitable.
But this progress runs headlong into Bjartur's immovable philosophical resistance. He just scorns the entire concept of collective ownership.
And you have to ask why. Why would a man who is struggling so desperately reject a system that's designed to save him from exploitation?
Because the co-op demands dependence.
Exactly. Dependence on a collective, organized body. And for Bjartur, any form of dependence is a form of slavery. He declares he's sticking with his old merchant, who has kept body and soul together for more than a few in his time.
His cynicism is rooted in this belief that any organization is inherently corrupt. He says the co-op bonus will be thickest or he bites it off.
He believes the reward will be siphoned off by those at the top, just like the old system, but now it's just disguised with this altruistic language. He refuses to trade his personal tangible debt to one man for an abstract communal debt to an organization.
For him, freedom means staying entirely outside the system, even if that system promises financial security.
Yet, the huge irony is that the forces of the new economy are inescapable. Even Jartur can't stay isolated forever.
Despite all his ideological resistance, all his vocal contempt.
The sources reveal that he is eventually forced to join the co-op, and later he even receives funds and supplies from it. He is dragged, cursing and resistant, into the modern age he despises.
Which just demonstrates the futility of his absolute independence against these huge global economic shifts. The battle is lost the moment he has to rely on anyone.
Whether it's the old merchant or the new co-op. And this unrelenting pursuit of self-sovereignty has a catastrophic cost that we have to turn to now. The human cost. His family.
The sources make it so clear that Bjartur's absolute independence is also a mechanism for emotional isolation. And you see the human tragedy begin immediately with his first marriage to Rosa.
The wedding night confrontation is just unbelievably brutal.
Bjartur, who feels like he's conquered the earth, now insists on conquering his wife's past. He's insanely jealous, accusing her of premarital relations, saying she's passing on the lifeless corpse of love.
It's a complete violation of trust, driven by his need for absolute ownership over everything in his fold. And Rosa's reaction is just one of terror and desperation.
She swears by everything holy that no man had known her. But in her fear, she links her personal tragedy directly to the history of the croft.
She screams, "God Almighty, help me if I lie. I know there's a curse on this fold. The croft has been destroyed 7 times by ghosts and devils. And what good will it be, though you call it summer houses, if you go and kill your wife on her bridal night and give Columkilly my bones?"
She instinctively links his violation to the curse of Columkilly. Her private pain merges with the public, ancient terror of the land.
She knows this place destroys life. And in that moment, Bjartur's jealousy and possessiveness become a human manifestation of that very curse.
Rosa's time at summer houses is just marked by isolation and indifference to his ambitions, and then despair. Her death is a quiet, empty affair.
She lay lifeless in the bedstead opposite. And the tragedy is compounded by the fact that her place is immediately and functionally filled by a kindly housekeeper, Gudni.
Who's found nurturing the newborn child, Asta Salija, trying to share her own warmth with this infant that barely shows any signs of life.
The lack of emotion around Rosa's death just underlines Bjartur's priorities. The farm must run, the labor must continue. And the children born into this life, Asta Salija, Guvender, and Nani, they all eventually seek a radical escape from the prison of their father's unrelenting dogma.
Asta Salija, especially, she's portrayed as so intensely sensitive, so perceptive. Because the physical world is so harsh, her entire interior life is built on literature and romantic dreams.
She finds solace in fairy tales, like Snow White, who was rescued by the prince in a glass coffin, and in exotic stories, like The Hunter by the Mississippi who fled Paris.
She internalizes these rugged love songs her father taught her, and she identifies with the maiden named Rosa, her own deceased mother. And Bjartur, maybe without even realizing it, calls her his flower.
This combination of intense sensitivity and romantic dreaming, it makes her profoundly vulnerable. And her traumatic encounter and subsequent pregnancy with Ingolfur Arnarsson, the co-op secretary, it forces a collision between her inner world and her father's rigid one.
When the bailiff's wife confronts him about Asta Saloja's condition, about the need for support, Bjartur's reaction is just cold, brutal, and absolute.
His ideology demands he disown any complication, any impurity. He dismisses all responsibility. He says the Rafsmiri people begot her and then abandoned her.
He tells them that henceforward they no longer exist for me.
His prized independence means casting out his own daughter and his own grandchild because they represent debt, failure, and dependence on the community. He chooses his philosophical principle over blood and love.
And Asta Salelja's flight from the croft is just this heartbreaking piece of symbolism. She leaves to find her lover, and at first she feels free, like the princess from her stories. She thinks she's riding toward her happy ending.
But the reality of the Icelandic landscape shatters that romantic dream instantly. A sudden blizzard hits, and she realizes the brutal truth. The heath is life itself, vast and unforgiving.
And in that moment, she realizes her father, whom she fears, is not a man.
He's a troll. A creature of the land, defined by its cold, immense, and unmoving hostility. Her entire romantic framework is just destroyed by the physical and emotional reality of her surroundings.
So while she seeks freedom through tragic romance, her brother Govender, the loyal materialist, seeks escape through pure economic calculation.
And Govender knows the sheep better than anyone. He's the most capable of the three children to carry on the tradition.
But he gets this singular opportunity, $200 from an uncle to go to America. And his response is one of the most devastating insights into the hidden emotional costs of this life.
His realization is so simple, but it captures everything. He reflects. A fellow dare not think anything or hope for anything aloud, so he simply keeps on doing something until they're dead.
That phrase should just stop you cold.
It should. The work is so relentless, the potential for failure so high, that the only way to endure is to silence your own internal life. Dreams and hopes become liabilities. The land demands silence and unending labor, and it makes you a servant of necessity until you die.
So Govender sees the money not just as cash, but as the only chance he will ever get to be something in the world, like the people who dared to think aloud.
And finally, Nani, the youngest son, completes the exodus. Nani was born with a dream, a gift from the elf people and his mother's dream, that he should sing for the whole world.
He's the least tethered to the reality of the fold.
He reads about the exotic places in books California, Mississippi, the distant landscapes from the stories his sister loved, and he leaves, carrying the sorrow of his mother and sister in his heart.
The source says that this sorrow will follow him all his life, coloring his every song.
So the one who leaves to sing is burdened by the very silence and sorrow the others tried to escape. Bjartfur's relentless independence has successfully driven away the only people who might have given him purpose or warmth.
And this profound personal loss leads us straight to the ultimate irony of his life.
After his children leave, he actually achieves a period of massive material success during the WWI boom years.
The man who started in that tiny, dark turf bunker expands dramatically. He gets up to 250 sheep, he has hired labor, he expands his miserable buildings, he becomes a large-scale farmer.
And most ironically of all, he even gets a loan from the savings bank to build a modern concrete house with water on tap, linoleum, and electric light.
He has finally conquered the physical environment. He has the modern house he always scorned.
Built using the collective power of a savings bank, another one of those organized institutions he ideologically fought against his whole life. But this material success is immediately hollowed out by the loss of his family and the crushing modern economic reality of debt.
The house is an empty victory.
It's uninhabitable to him because of the debt, but it's a perpetual reminder of the loan he has to pay off with his sheep. He sacrificed everything for this house, and now it's a monument to his economic subjugation. His triumph is entirely predicated on the very market forces and debt systems he spent his life resisting.
And the final symbolic act happens as he's forced to sell summer houses. He's lost the land, but he tries to maintain his philosophical dignity.
He rolls the headstone of Gunvor's ghost, that large stone he had placed there years ago, to prove he didn't believe in curses or Norns, into the ravine.
That stone represented his intellectual defiance, his rejection of the irrational forces of the land.
But by rolling it away, he's admitting that whether it was an ancient Norn, or the ghost of Gunvor, or the modern, equally relentless forces of the global market, the pressure was unavoidable. He didn't defeat the spectral powers, they just changed form.
Which leads him to his final, bitter philosophy, a devastating summary of his lifelong struggle.
He concludes that the lone worker never escapes. The independent life, the life of a sole proprietor, is nothing more than a perpetual flight from other men who seek to kill him.
That just redefines his entire life. He thought he was standing firm, defending his sovereignty.
But in the end, he realizes he was always running. Running from the merchants, from the bailiff, from the bank, from his own dependencies. Independence wasn't a fortress, it was a desperate evasion.
And that final scene of the family moving away is just steeped in tragic irony and defeat.
Purter sits by the side of the road with his family, chewing grass stalks, ready for the next move. A peasant family flitting away, resembling a family fleeing for whom? Not for themselves, anyway.
They're fleeing because the forces of the world were stronger than one man's individual will.
And yet the sources grant him one single ironic victory.
He has money in the co-op society.
Money he never wanted, from the organization he scorned, earned through the boon he resisted after sacrificing every single thing he loved. It's a bitter, haunting epitaph to a life lived purely on principle.
So when we dive this deep into these sources, what becomes overwhelmingly clear is the dual nature of Bjartfur's independence.
It was a source of immense, almost religious pride. It was the spiritual fuel that allowed him to endure the absolute darkest conditions.
But that very same independence was a mechanism for isolation and profound loss. The relentless physical pressure of the landscape, coupled with the economic systems and the folklore, it all proved unavoidable.
His single-minded pursuit of ownership drove out everything he actually needed to live for: his children, his wife, any true sense of connection.
And this is exactly what Bjarter himself finally realizes, late in life, after his worldly victory had turned to dust.
He concludes that material success, the big house, the power, it was all meaningless if in that house blooms no lovely flower.
Referring, of course, to Asta Salilja, the daughter he rejected in his ideological purity.
He only understood the value of the flower after he'd already crushed it under the weight of his independence.
The ultimate paradox that these sources present is laid bare in the contrasting fates of the father and his children. Does true freedom lie in conquering the land, enduring the solitude, clinging to that pioneer ideal like Bjarter?
Or does it lie in abandoning the land for the wider world, fleeing to America, seeking romance or song, or just the possibility of thinking aloud, as his children did?
The sources seem to suggest that maybe the ultimate act of independence is abandonment, the choice to leave the system entirely rather than trying to conquer it.
And if Jarter's final conclusion is correct, that the lone worker is always in perpetual flight from other men who seek to kill him, then the question for you to consider is this, building on everything we've explored today.
If the market, the elements, and even your own family demands some form of compromise or debt, can the ideal of independence ever be anything more than the loneliest, most costly illusion available to humankind?
It forces us to ask not just what we gain by standing alone, but what we lose by refusing to owe anything to anyone.